Chapter 26 of Kenilworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Kenilworth by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 26. Snug. Have you the lion's part written? Pray, if it be, give it me, for I am slow of study. Quince. You may do it extempore, for it is nothing but roaring. Midsummer Night's Dream. When the Countess of Leicester arrived at the outer gate of the castle of Kenilworth, she found the tower, beneath which its ample portal arch opened, guarded in a singular manner. Upon the battlements were placed gigantic warders, with clubs, battle-axes, and other implements of ancient warfare, designed to represent the soldiers of King Arthur, those primitive Britons by whom, according to romantic tradition, the castle had been first tenanted, though history carried back its antiquity only to the times of the Heptarchy. Some of these tremendous figures were real men, dressed up with vizards and buskins. Others were mere pageants composed of pasteboard and buckram, which, viewed from beneath, and mingled with those that were real, formed a sufficiently striking representation of what was intended. But the gigantic porter who waited at the gate beneath, and actually discharged the duties of warder, owed none of his terrors to fictitious means. He was a man whose huge stature, thews, sinews, and bulk, in proportion, would have enabled him to enact Colbrand, Ascapart, or any other giant of romance, without raising himself nearer to heaven even by the altitude of a chopin. The legs and knees of the son of Anak were bare, as were his arms from a span below the shoulder, but his feet were defended with sandals, fastened with cross straps of scarlet leather studded with brazen knobs. A close jerkin of scarlet velvet looped with gold, with short breeches of the same, covered his body and a part of his limbs, and he wore on his shoulders, instead of a cloak, the skin of a black bear. The head of this formidable person was uncovered, except by his shaggy, black hair, which descended on either side around features of that huge, lumpish, and heavy cast which are often annexed to men of very uncommon size, and which, notwithstanding some distinguished exceptions, have created a general prejudice against giants, as being a dull and sullen kind of persons. This tremendous warder was appropriately armed with a heavy club, spiked with steel. In fine, he represented excellently one of those giants of popular romance, who figure in every fairy tale or legend of knight-errantry. The demeanour of this modern Titan, when Wayland Smith bent his attention to him, had in it something arguing much mental embarrassment and vexation, for sometimes he sat down for an instant on a massive stone bench, which seemed placed for his accommodation, beside the gateway, and then ever and anon he started up, scratching his huge head, and striding to and fro on his post, like one under a fit of impatience and anxiety. It was while the porter was pacing before the gate in this agitated manner, that Wayland modestly, yet as a matter of course, not however without some mental misgiving, was about to pass him and enter the portal arch. The porter, however, stopped his progress, bidding him, in a thundering voice, "Stand back!" and enforcing his injunction by heaving up his steel-shod mace, and dashing it on the ground before Wayland's horse's nose, with such vehemence that the pavement flashed fire, and the archway rang to the clamour. Wayland, availing himself of Dickie's hints, began to state that he belonged to a band of performers, to which his presence was indispensable, that he had been accidentally detained behind, and much to the same purpose. But the warder was inexorable, and kept muttering and murmuring something betwixt his teeth, which Wayland could make little of, and addressing betwixt whiles a refusal of admittance, couched in language that was but too intelligible. A specimen of his speech might run thus: "What, how now, my masters?" to himself. "Here's a stir, here's a coil." Then to Wayland, "You are a loitering knave, and shall have no entrance." Again to himself, Here's a throng, here's a thrusting, I shall ne'er get through with it. Here's a ah, to Wayland. Back from the gate, or I'll break the pate of thee. Once more to himself. Here's a no, I shall never get through it. Stand still, whispered Flibbertigibbet into Wayland's ear. I know where the shoe pinches, and will tame him in an instant. He dropped down from the horse, and, skipping up to the porter, plucked him by the tail of the bearskin, so as to induce him to decline his huge head, and whispered something in his ear. Not at the command of the lord of some eastern talisman did ever Afrite change his horrid frown into a look of smooth submission more suddenly than the gigantic porter of Kenilworth relaxed the terrors of his looks at the instant Flibbertigibbet's whisper reached his ears. He flung his club upon the ground, and caught up Dickie Sludge, raising him to such a distance from the earth as might have proved perilous had he chanced to let him slip. "It is even so," he said, with a thundering sound of exultation. "It is even so, my little dandieprat. But who the devil could teach it thee?" "Do not thou care about that," said Flibbertigibbet. "But" he looked at Wayland and the lady, and then sunk what he had to say in a whisper, which needed not be a loud one, as the giant held him for his convenience close to his ear. The porter then gave Dickie a warm caress, and set him on the ground with the same care which a careful housewife uses in replacing a cracked china cup upon her mantelpiece, calling out at the same time to Wayland and the lady, in with you, and take heed how you come too late another day when I chance to be porter." "Ay, ay, in with you," added Flibbertigibbet. "I must stay a short space with mine honest Philistine, my Goliath of Gath here, but I will be with you anon, and at the bottom of all your secrets, were they as deep and dark as the castle dungeon." "I do believe thou wouldest," said Wayland; "but I trust the secret will be soon out of my keeping, and then I shall care the less whether thou or any one knows it." They now crossed the entrance tower, which obtained the name of the Gallery Tower, from the following circumstance. The whole bridge, extending from the entrance to another tower on the opposite side of the lake, called Mortimer's Tower, was so disposed as to make a spacious tilt yard, about 130 yards in length, and 10 in breadth, strewed with the finest sand, and defended on either side by strong and high palisades. The broad and fair gallery, destined for the ladies who were to witness the feats of chivalry presented on this area, was erected on the northern side of the outer tower to which it gave name. Our travellers passed slowly along the bridge or tilt yard, and arrived at Mortimer's Tower, at its farthest extremity, through which the approach led into the outer or base court of the castle. Mortimer's Tower bore on its front the scutcheon of the Earl of March, whose daring ambition overthrew the throne of Edward II., and aspired to share his power with the she wolf of France, to whom the unhappy monarch was wedded. The gate which opened under this ominous memorial was guarded by many warders in rich liveries, but they offered no opposition to the entrance of the Countess and her guide, who, having passed by license of the principal porter at the Gallery Tower, were not, it may be supposed, liable to interruption from his deputies. They entered accordingly in silence the great outward court of the castle, having then full before them that vast and lordly pile, with all its stately towers, each gate open, as if in sign of unlimited hospitality, and the apartments filled with noble guests of every degree, besides dependants, retainers, domestics of every description, and all the appendages and promoters of mirth and revelry. Amid this stately and busy scene, Wayland halted his horse, and looked upon the lady, as if waiting her commands what was next to be done, since they had safely reached the place of destination. As she remained silent, Wayland, after waiting a minute or two, ventured to ask her in direct terms what were her next commands. She raised her hand to her forehead, as if in the act of collecting her thoughts and resolution, while she answered him in a low and suppressed voice, like the murmurs of one who speaks in a dream. commands. I may indeed claim right to command, but who is there will obey me?" Then suddenly raising her head, like one who has formed a decisive resolution, she addressed a gaily dressed domestic, who was crossing the court with importance and bustle in his countenance. "Stop, sir," she said, "I desire to speak with the Earl of Leicester." "With whom, an it please you?" said the man, surprised at the demand, and then looking upon the mean equipage of her who used towards him such a tone of authority, he added with insolence, "Why, what Bess of Bedlam is this would ask to see my lord on such a day as the present?" "Friend," said the Countess, "be not insolent. My business with the Earl is most urgent." "You must get some one else to do it, were it thrice as urgent," said the fellow. "I should summon my lord from the Queen's royal presence to do your business, should I? I would like to be thanked with a horsewhip. I marvel our old porter took not measure of such ware with his club, instead of giving them passage. But his brain is addled with getting his speech by heart." Two or three persons stopped, attracted by the fleering way in which the serving man expressed himself; and Wayland, alarmed both for himself and the lady, hastily addressed himself to one who appeared the most civil, and thrusting a piece of money into his hand, held a moment's counsel with him on the subject of finding a place of temporary retreat for the lady. The person to whom he spoke, being one in some authority, rebuked the others for their incivility, and commanding one fellow to take care of the stranger's horses, he desired them to follow him. The Countess retained presence of mind sufficient to see that it was absolutely necessary she should comply with his request, and leaving the rude lackeys and grooms to crack their brutal jests about light heads, light heels, and so forth, Wayland and she followed in silence the deputy usher, who undertook to be their conductor. They entered the inner court of the castle by the great gateway, which extended betwixt the principal keep or donjon, called Caesar's Tower, and a stately building which passed by the name of King Henry's Lodging, and were thus placed in the centre of the noble pile, which presented on its different fronts magnificent specimens of every species of castellated architecture, from the Conquest to the reign of Elizabeth, with the appropriate style and ornaments of each. Across this inner court also they were conducted by their guide to a small but strong tower, occupying the north east angle of the building, adjacent to the great hall, and filling up a space betwixt the immense range of kitchens and the end of the great hall itself. The lower part of this tower was occupied by some of the household officers of Leicester, owing to its convenient vicinity to the places where their duty lay. But in the upper story, which was reached by a narrow, winding stair, was a small octangular chamber, which, in the great demand for lodgings, had been on the present occasion fitted up for the reception of guests, though generally said to have been used as a place of confinement for some unhappy person who had been there murdered. Tradition called this prisoner Mervyn, and transferred his name to the tower. That it had been used as a prison was not improbable, for the floor of each story was arched, the walls of tremendous thickness, while the space of the chamber did not exceed 15 feet in diameter. The window, however, was pleasant, though narrow, and commanded a delightful view of what was called the Pleasance, a space of ground enclosed and decorated with arches, trophies, statues, fountains, and other architectural monuments, which formed one access from the castle itself into the garden. There was a bed in the apartment, and other preparations for the reception of a guest, to which the Countess paid but slight attention, her notice being instantly arrested by the sight of writing materials placed on the table, not very commonly to be found in the bedrooms of those days, which instantly suggested the idea of writing to Leicester, and remaining private until she had received his answer. The deputy usher having introduced them into this commodious apartment, courteously asked Wayland, whose generosity he had experienced, whether he could do anything further for his service. Upon receiving a gentle hint that some refreshment would not be unacceptable, he presently conveyed the smith to the buttery hatch, where dressed provisions of all sorts were distributed, with hospitable profusion, to all who asked for them. Wayland was readily supplied with some light provisions, such as he thought would best suit the fated appetite of the lady, and did not omit the opportunity of himself making a hasty but hearty meal on more substantial fare. He then returned to the apartment in the turret, where he found the Countess, who had finished her letter to Leicester, and, in lieu of a seal and silken thread, had secured it with a braid of her own beautiful tresses, fastened by what is called a true love knot. "Good friend," said she to Wayland, "whom God hath sent to aid me at my utmost need, I do beseech thee, as the last trouble you shall take for an unfortunate lady, to deliver this letter to the noble Earl of Leicester, be it received as it may," she said, with features agitated betwixt hope and fear. "Thou, good fellow, shalt have no more cumber with me. But I hope the best, and if ever lady made a poor man rich, thou hast surely deserved it at my hand, should my happy days ever come round again. Give it, I pray you, into Lord Leicester's own hand, and mark how he looks on receiving it." Wayland, on his part, readily undertook the commission, but anxiously prayed the lady, in his turn, to partake of some refreshment, in which he at length prevailed, more through importunity and her desire to see him begone on his errand, than from any inclination the Countess felt to comply with his request. He then left her, advising her to lock her door on the inside, and not to stir from her little apartment, and went to seek an opportunity of discharging her errand, as well as of carrying into effect a purpose of his own, which circumstances had induced him to form. In fact, from the conduct of the lady during the journey, her long fits of profound silence, the irresolution and uncertainty which seemed to pervade all her movements, and the obvious incapacity of thinking and acting for herself under which she seemed to labour, Wayland had formed the not improbable opinion that the difficulties of her situation had in some degree affected her understanding. When she had escaped from the seclusion of Cumnor Place, and the dangers to which she was there exposed, it would have seemed her most rational course to retire to her father's, or elsewhere at a distance from the power of those by whom these dangers had been created. When, instead of doing so, she demanded to be conveyed to Kenilworth, Wayland had been only able to account for her conduct by supposing that she meant to put herself under the tutelage of Tressilian, and to appeal to the protection of the Queen. But now, instead of following this natural course, she entrusted him with a letter to Leicester, the patron of Varney, and within whose jurisdiction at least, if not under his express authority, all the evils she had already suffered were inflicted upon her. This seemed an unsafe and even a desperate measure, and Wayland felt anxiety for his own safety, as well as that of the lady. Should he execute her commission before he had secured the advice and countenance of a protector? He therefore resolved, before delivering the letter to Leicester, that he would seek out Tressilian, and communicate to him the arrival of the lady at Kenilworth, and thus at once rid himself of all further responsibility, and devolve the task of guiding and protecting this unfortunate lady upon the patron who had at first employed him in her service. "He will be a better judge than I am," said Wayland, "whether she is to be gratified in this humour of appeal to my Lord of Leicester, which seems like an act of insanity. And therefore I will turn the matter over on his hands, deliver him the letter, receive what they list to give me by way of guerdon, and then show the Castle of Kenilworth a pair of light heels. For after the work I have been engaged in, it will be, I fear, neither a safe nor wholesome place of residence, and I would rather shoe colts in the coldest common in England than share in their gayest revels." Chapter 26.